What's up everyone, this is Ryan here and you are watching episode 32, I believe, of my livestream Q&A. This is apologies for being a couple minutes late for the people who are already watching. It's just been a really hectic and busy week and morning, and as usual I'm running on limited sleep, but that's totally fine because, sometimes you have to sleep a little bit less. Anyways, let's get started here. So I don't have a huge amount planned for this episode, but basically one of the main things I wanted to focus on was kind of talking about sort of sharing my experiences over the past week, messing around with Kotlin, applying a lot of TDD to solve problems. TDD stands for test-driven development, and a bunch of stuff like that. And what I pretty much plan to do is I'll try and answer lots of questions, and also when things slow down a little bit in the chat section, then what I'll do is just kind of, off-topic ramble about various things, but all programming related. Anyways, before we get to all of that stuff, let's just get started here. So I would like to thank the following people for supporting me on Patreon. So that's going to be Seth Keegan, Trevor Halvorsen, Bassam Hilal, Tina Fredericks, Nanotech, Shadow, Mr. Bidwell, Graham Hertzeg, Sushil Chanda, Elad Stavi, and Shoku Mustofi. So to those people, I say thank you very much for supporting me. Much appreciated. And to everyone else watching, if you would like to give me a hand, then you can, consider liking and sharing my content on social media. Of course, I've got the Patreon set up if you are in a position where you want to throw me a couple dollars. And then I've also got some other stuff like an ebook, which you might want to look into. So anyways, that's our high-pressure sales commercial for the start of this episode. Anyways, what's up? We got a couple people joining us. So we've got Ahmad. I don't even know what your name is, but I'm just going to call you Shah. And Mr. Bidwell. So to you people, I say, what's up? This is not going to be like this is going to be one of those it is what it is episodes, because I'm bloody tired, but for good reason. I spent the entire, mostly for good reasons, but I basically spent the entire week really diving into Kotlin and working on my Android Model View Presenter Calculator tutorial. So I'll be going through that in a moment, but that's mostly what I worked on. And also recently found out that my roommate is moving out, and I basically have to move out as well at the end of March. So that was kind of something I wasn't particularly fond of dealing with right now, but that's totally fine, it is what it is. Anyways, let's get started here. So, the repo I'm going to be looking at for the moment is going to be called Kotlin Calculator. It should just be in the description box down below. And so basically, the main thing I wanted to talk about is what I dealt with over the weekend. Or not the weekend, sorry, you can tell I'm bloody exhausted. What I dealt with over the week. So one of the things I wanted to do with this new calculator tutorial is I wanted to basically rebuild my original Model View Presenter calculator, which I did in Java like over 2 years ago now, and kind of rebuild it in Kotlin, but I also wanted to build kind of my own basic math library. And the reason for that was in the older project I used a library which worked, but it was basically deprecated. And so I thought, well, why don't we try kind of writing our own thing here, because I kind of wanted to just take a crack at writing something that's just like entirely a back-end type deal. So going into this thing, I didn't actually think that this would be a particularly difficult thing to do, to write just like a basic sort of equation evaluator, but I'll just walk through this really quickly. So in this project, basically what I wanted to do is, it's more or less Model View Presenter architecture. Although one of the things I want to be talking about pretty quickly is how I'm really starting to see that, the differences between Model View Presenter and Model View View Model and all these different things, like I almost want to get away from even just talking about basic 3-layer architectures in terms of, anyways, I'm not going to ramble about that yet, but longer story short, it's basically Model View Presenter. So for our view, we've got a fragment, and I inject a presenter into that fragment. Let's see if I can use this stuff use some shortcuts to open these things up and save some time. So yeah, so we've got our view, and then I'm going to go Control N, presenter. Hey, we've got calculator presenter. So this is our calculator presenter in our model view presenter setup. And of course gets the view passed in, we got the scheduler, and we also have a use case. And what this use case basically does is exactly what it says. It evaluates expressions. So what I basically do is I say to the, what do you call it? I say to the use case, hey, do your thing with this expression when it's grabbed from the view. And then we'll hop into that use case really quick. I'll just walk everyone through this quickly, and then we'll move to some other stuff. But open up the domain package, and in here we have, we have our use case, which is evaluate expression. This is actually something I was working on this morning, but we have two classes that the use case talks to. So we've got a validator and a calculator. And pretty much based on inputs from both of these things, I'm going to decide whether I return like a failure model or a success model to the presenter. I'll try and zoom in a little bit. So yeah, and that's basically how that stuff looks. Now, the thing I wanted to talk about specifically was I had to write, and this thing isn't necessarily complete. If you have any feedback, I'm really happy to hear it. But, oh, this validator should not actually be in that class. That should be down here, but I'll go ahead and do that. Because reasons. Anyways, that probably broke everything. But what I wanted to do, let me just make sure that the chat's working and everything. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create like a math library that could accept just a string, which could be of different, it could be more than a binomial expression essentially. So if I go to calculator impl test down here, so this was the test that helped me, the test class that helped me write this class here. And I did very much apply test-driven development here. But I ran into this huge issue, which I'll talk about in a moment. But writing this thing was pretty hilarious because I thought, okay, well, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to pass it in simple expressions and complex expressions. And I want it to be able to like itemize and break these equations down and still kind of follow BEDMAS. So originally I thought this would be a pretty easy thing to do, but it turns out that there's a fair amount of ugliness that actually comes from breaking strings down into two separate, I basically had to break down the expressions down into operands and operators. And then I had to do just a bunch of stuff. And longer story shorter, it ended up taking quite a while. And I spent about 8 hours working on that yesterday. And it was just hell. Because not only is writing kind of a math class about as dry and boring as you'd probably expect, but for some reason, my Android Studio implementation takes like 10 minutes to compile even like a single unit test sometimes. So I don't understand what's going on here, but basically what I was dealing with is, you see, when you're following test-driven development, you basically want to be like running these tests every couple of minutes until they pass. Like you write the test, you go write some implementation code, then you come back, run the test, see if it passes. If it passes, yay, move on to the next thing. That's kind of the TDD process. Well, when your compile times are in excess of like even a minute, it rapidly becomes something which is just like a major frustration. So anyways, I need to figure out why it's doing that. I made a couple changes to my Android Studio setup and basically made it so that I could bring the compile down to like usually 1 or 2 minutes. But even then, it's kind of a major issue for me. Like, if you want to be able to do test-driven development fast, you have to be able to execute the tests quickly. Otherwise, it really does start to make your development time too friggin' long. So anyways, yeah, that's basically my experience of the past couple of days. And yeah, let's just kind of jump into the chat here. All right. So let's get started. A couple questions. Sorry, I will try and make the font size bigger, Fadi. All right. So we've got our first question from Ahmad. So we'll just kind of dive right into that. I also want to talk about orientation changes later, but we'll see if I end up getting to that, because I didn't actually manage to do quite as much studying as I wanted to do about it. But anyways. So this question is from Ahmad. I'll go ahead and increase the font size here. All right, so Ahmad says, Ryan, I'm starting a new job as a mobile application developer, basically Android for now, but later iOS and Xamarin. That's not the whole question. Ah, there we are. Sorry, it was two parts. And that threw my brain for a loop. All right, there we go. So, yeah. So Ahmad is starting a new job as an application developer. So he's mentioned a couple things. For starters, that he is going to be learning new technologies on different platforms. So iOS, of course, is going to be referring to Apple software. And then Xamarin is a way that you can basically build apps using C and C++, if I'm not mistaken, which I think is a way of like building maybe native applications. I don't know. But it's definitely C++ based, if I recall correctly. So, but Ahmad's question is, what should he start focusing on as a teamwork developer? So I'm just going to try and share my input on this. I don't have an extensive amount of experience sort of working on development teams, but I can give you a bit of input. And I do have a lot of potential input on teamwork dynamics, because that's something that I've thought about for a very, very long time. So we'll see what I can really get to here. But I'm going to assume you're maybe junior to intermediate level, or at least that's who I'm going to answer this question to. If not, I apologize. Maybe some of this information will be stuff that you already know. But the first thing I would recommend is, so for technical skills, when working on a team, you're going to want to be familiar with Git and Git flow. So this is just very basic, or you could even look at, maybe they use Subversion. So these are all sort of like revision control systems. Git flow in particular, I think, is probably the one you'll want to look at most, because essentially what Git flow is it's a tool you can use to work on sort of projects with multiple developers. So kind of, we'll see how much I can remember off the top of my head, but essentially what Git flow does is, like, let's say you have a repository A, so some project, and you've got repository, or sorry, you've got developers A, B, and C. What Git flow allows you to do is you create multiple branches of your Git repository. And so you have, like, again, I'm probably not going to be able to remember all these off the top of my head, but you'll have, like, whatever, master, development, feature, hotfix, production. Let's see if I can remember all these. I think that's it. I feel like I'm missing one or two, but so anyways, what's going to happen is when you're using Git flow, you're going to get a situation where you have all these different branches, and then, like, let's say, let's say you have multiple features like you've got one master project, and then you've got developer A working on one thing, B working on another thing, C working on another thing. Using, like, for example, Git flow, you're going to be able to distribute your, you're basically going to be able to develop on feature branches. Anyways, I don't need to give a huge, long lesson, but first and foremost, when working with the development team, you're going to need to familiarize yourself with revision control systems. So that might be totally not new information to Ahmad, but I'm just trying to cover as much ground as I can here. So that's the first thing. Just familiarizing yourself with version control. I'm just trying to think, what else can we kind of think of? Yeah, that's kind of one of the main things. You've also mentioned that you're learning multiple platforms. Teamwork developer. Well, you're gonna want to have a basic idea of like Scrum / Agile principles. I won't. You're gonna want to be like familiar, especially like if your company uses Scrum. Scrum is essentially like a way that development teams can sort of like execute the development of a project. And that you can do all kinds of neat things, like you can measure measure progress rates, and it's one of the more popular things I've heard of. I don't really practice Scrum because I don't work in a development team, but in a way I take parts of it. Like every day I sit down to program, I do have an idea of what I want to do, and that kind of thing. So anyways, Scrum and Agile principles. Agile is, you can basically look these up on your own or ask a question about them later. I'm definitely not an expert in Scrum, but I do practice Agile quite a bit, as far as I understand it. Those would be like the main technical things I'm thinking of, other than just, being familiar with the Android platform. So I'm not sure if I can not sure if I can talk about anything beyond that. Just trying to think, is there anything else useful I can say in terms of team dynamics? I think that's pretty much it. If there's, not the most expansive question, but these would be like the two main technical skills that I would focus on. And then as far as being like a team player kind of thing, I don't really know. It's really going to depend on who you end up getting kind of saddled with as far as developers go. But one of the main things I always try to do is, like, when I'm working with a new group of people, which happens fairly often over my lifetime, I don't try and force my ideas too much into the equation at first, or too much into the scenario. What I'll generally do, like, let's say I'm starting as kind of a junior person on the team, my main goals are going to be like, okay, so for starters, I try to be nice to everyone by default, but not in like a walk all over me kind of way, but I'll always be pleasant until I have a reason not to. My main goal when I get into like a new group of people who I'm working with is I want to know, okay, where are these people's heads at? Like, is this person someone who's very nice and open to new ideas and supportive? Or is my team member or project manager someone who's very dogmatic, not really open to new ideas, and has major ego issues? And those are, I know this is sort of outside of programming, but those are the kind of dynamics that you kind of need to identify, and it really does appear to be like a case-by-case basis. So once you kind of identify what your team members are like, what the overarching goal of the team is, and you can like ask, the owner of the company or your project manager, like, what are our main focuses here? What do I need to do my job well, essentially? Once you have those things kind of figured out, then you just, I'm sure you're a smart person. You'll figure it out from there. But I just, just some advice on joining new teams and stuff like that. Anyways, I'm just going to run a quick commercial break, then we'll get to another question. All right. So, and no, this is not me. All right. So this question is in relation to what I was talking about earlier, which is that I wrote a, I guess this is called a lexical analyzer. So Ryan asks, and this is just another person called Ryan. I'm not asking my own question here. Good name though. So Ryan asks, why reinvent the wheel though? A lexical analyzer that takes bed mass into account is very hard, and many people struggle doing it. But it's been done to a high standard by Apache in that. So the question, this is a very good question. Like earlier I demonstrated this thing that I wrote here, which appears to be working. The problem is I didn't get to test it, run all of the tests on it because of compilation errors or compilation times being too long. But it was basically passing some of the tests. It was, yeah. Anyways, I recently made a change to it, so it'll fail those tests. But longer story shorter, this is the thing that Ryan Brown is talking about, other Ryan, and which is basically like a calculator implementation. And what it does is it accepts a string, which could be a string of, it could be like a complex expression, it could be a simple expression. And I had a lot of trouble writing this. I'll answer the question in a bit, but I had a lot of trouble writing this because it turns out that this is kind of a difficult thing to do. And how I solved this problem, these are my actual notes that I used to solve this problem. So what I did was I've been planning to write this thing. I originally planned to write this thing like 6 months ago, but if I show you my really ugly notes here, essentially I looked at, okay, how do you like break down an expression? Anyways, blah, blah, blah. What I decided to do is break things into operators and operands, and over time I figured out first how to like break an expression into numbers and operators and operands rather. And all that really required doing was, this is where Kotlin was super useful. But I basically just pass in the whole expression and then use some Kotlin magic map to basically, so I used for operands these as delimiters. So these are the things that I want to separate the statements. And then down here to get the operators, I had to use this regex shit, which regex is super useful, but it's really not fun to write. It's really ugly. Anyways, longer story short, why the hell would I bother doing that is basically what Ryan is asking. Like, so there's a couple reasons. Number one, I wanted to learn how to write it as an intellectual challenge, because to be able to write like something that's kind of that low level of an implementation is just something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to say, hey, every bit of code in this repository is basically written by me. Well, of course, there's other tools that I'm using, but the main stuff anyway. And so to answer your question, Ryan, the question was like, why would I reinvent the wheel and bother to write this thing? Well, there wasn't actually a Kotlin library I could find or a Java library I could find that was up to date, open source, and really what I wanted. Maybe it's out there. I didn't look especially hard, but also B, it was really just for the experience of learning how to do this. And you know, I got a chance to really practice my TDD, because what I essentially did was I figured out, okay, let's break the expressions down first. And then, so what are the rules I need to follow to evaluate these stacks? And then I said, okay, well, for starters, and these translate to computer instructions. And why I'm showing this to people is if you have a really difficult programming problem, or semi-difficult, you can break the problem into statements, and then you want to translate those statements into code. Because generally speaking, it's easier for me to think of like a logical flow in pseudocode. So I said to myself, okay, so the first thing I want to do when I get an expression is take the first one, take the second one, and then take the first operator. And then my first check is first operator low or high priority, dictated by whether it's a multiply or a division. If the first operator is high priority, then we evaluate this and then reinsert that back into the stack. So anyways, blah, blah, blah. After the first iteration of operations, this is what our stack looks like now. Then we run this again until we come all the way down to just having basically one single operand left. And so that's basically how this thing works. And it required some tricky code to write, and I had to apply test-driven development. Like this thing here, get operands, the first thing I did is I wrote a test, get operands, and then I'm like, okay, what do I want this unit to do? Sorry, I realize this is kind of difficult to see. Just give it a minute to load. There we go. So yeah, the first thing I did is I said, okay, let's run get operands. I hadn't even written this code yet, and I already knew what I was going to pass into the unit and how I wanted the unit to, what data I wanted the unit to return. Anyways, I think I've rambled enough about that. But so to answer the question, why would I reinvent the wheel about something like that? Practice, 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 practice. That's it. Just practice. All right. One quick, I'll get to that in a moment. I've got a question from Ravi as a junior developer. And those are some very good questions. Yeah, a lot of good questions today. All right, what I'm going to do, it might be a little bit longer of an episode. So I've got a viewer and one of my wise-ass programmers asking about orientation changes. What I'm going to do is I think I'm going to talk about that towards the end, and I'll try and talk about it at length because I've got a couple good questions from junior developers, and we often get these Q&As often get derailed in me rambling about technical stuff. So I'll do just a couple basic questions and we'll try and get to orientation changes. So let's see here. Just one thing, Ahmad mentions I shouldn't write an object where I can write a lambda closure, and I think he's talking about I believe Ahmad was, let's see here, view presentation mode. Where is it? I believe Ahmad was talking about this maybe. So my opinion on lambdas is that when I'm learning a new language or reading new code, lambdas actually really piss me off sometimes, because what they can end up doing is you can end up hiding a lot of information from your code, and I actually don't like that. So lambdas are great if you understand exactly what's going on in RxJava, but to be perfectly honest, there's cases where I'm not actually more concerned about condensing my code a little bit than having all of the implementation information just available immediately. And that's partly because I don't actually remember certain things super well, like minute implementation details that would get hidden by the Lambda. So I'm not saying I won't ever use Lambdas or don't use Lambdas, but in the case where I'm like learning and trying to understand new code, I'm not necessarily gonna, I don't really care about condensing it. Anyways, let's see here. I do have a solid state drive or not. Good question. Okay, so this is a question about TDD from Ravi. Just give me a moment here. Ravi's got two questions. I can answer them. So that's one. I can answer the first one quite quickly, most likely. So the first one, this is just kind of an important question for beginners. So Ravi asks / states that he couldn't get started with TDD. He wrote a simple espresso test, but it took forever to run. Maybe he was missing something. So my first suggestion to you, Ravi, is don't start with espresso testing. There might be other opinions about this, but I would suggest you actually begin your test-driven development practice with unit testing on the JVM. Now, I feel bad saying this because earlier this episode I was complaining about how since I've adopted Kotlin, my unit tests have been very, very slow, and that's very much an issue. But that's a tooling issue. That's not a principle of TDD issue. So what I would suggest, Ravi, is maybe don't start with espresso. It kind of depends, but the problem with espresso and starting with UI testing is that if you do a lot of things in your Vue class, which is ultimately what you're testing with espresso, you're going to have to deal with a lot of Android dependency bullshit, and it's going to be pretty annoying. I would suggest running unit tests, and how you can do that is, so unit tests are going to go in this test directory, where, as of course, it's not showing up here. Do I have project? Yeah, for some reason the Android test directory. Oh, this is POS Trainer. That's why. I probably deleted it. Let's see. So you've got the Android test, which is for Espresso and UI testing, and then you've got the test directory for unit tests. And Ravi, what I would suggest, I'm probably actually a pretty good resource for learning unit tests. So what I would suggest is check out my repositories, like any of my recent ones, and look through the unit test things and see how basically what I do is my main goal with unit testing and practicing TD is I want to test the things that need to be tested the most. And part of that is based on how I divide my architecture. Oh God, I'm recording at the same time. I don't know why, but OBS Studio decided to start recording on top of streaming. Anyways, sorry. Yeah, check out unit testing. And I would suggest that as an easier entry point into test-driven development in general. Anyways, that wasn't the so there's a question that Ravi asked, which was important as well. Another one here. So Ravi says he's starting as a junior developer in a company, and he's using some libraries in his project, retrofit and some other things. What are the long-term effects of using libraries in our app? And this is a really excellent question because it's a very high-level, pragmatic, is there drawbacks to using a library? So there's absolutely no easy answers to this question at all. And basically what it's going to boil down to is, let's say you have a platform. So you've got Android or you've got iOS or whatever. You're going to have a large amount of APIs or tools you can use, libraries, from the framework or the platform. You're also going to have a whole bunch of third-party libraries from, well, third-party sources that you could potentially use. So here's the thing. I would look at it on somewhat of a case-by-case basis. So do you, is the library a hell of a lot easier to use than implementing your own custom solution? I'm just going to give you some questions you can ask. So is the library a hell of a lot easier to use than implementing your own custom solution? So immediately I'm thinking probably retrofit would be a great example, where retrofit makes it really easy to write a REST adapter. So I would probably, you know, maybe you could write like your own lightweight OK HTTP, whatever HTTP client. But anyway, so like for REST, for example, you know, is it a hell of a lot easier than implementing your own custom solution? If yes, use the library. And none of these are going to be like set in stone. Do you want to write your own solution, but you might not have time? Maybe use the library. Hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here. Like, there's no easy answers. Is there a platform, non-third party solution which is pretty much an equivalent, but you're just too lazy to learn it? Learn the library. So the point I'm trying to get at here is, so the question you're asking is an excellent question. Are there costs or long-term effects for using libraries? And the best example I could give you right now is RxJava. So it took me about, probably a year before I really kind of deeply understood what RxJava was doing and was able to bring it to a point where it was like, holy crap, this thing is saving me an enormous amount of trouble. So I was like all super happy. Yeah, I've got this figured out. I feel like I know RxJava finally. And then Kotlin coroutines came out. Now, I don't understand Kotlin coroutines super well, but what we basically have is we've got RxJava 2 third-party solution for a lot of things, but concurrency and state management, in a nutshell. Then we've got like coroutines. And I don't actually know, I'm learning Kotlin right now, so I'm not actually super familiar with coroutines, but the basic idea I see with them is a solution for handling concurrency as well, maybe a lot more things. But basically the important thing about what I'm talking about here is we have a third-party solution I'm used to, and my projects are well, they're not tightly coupled because I build my apps in a modular way, but for now we'll say which my projects lean on heavily is a better way of saying. And then we have a platform solution, one less library to import. Platform solution, which may not be as high powered. I don't know this yet about coroutines. I don't actually know if you can do the same stuff. So what I'm saying here is, so when you're asking the question, should you use a library? Should you not use a library? There's never an easy answer. Sometimes it'll be better to use the library. Sometimes you'll be using a library for the sake of you're too lazy to learn a new and better one, which, you know, we've all been guilty of not having enough time sometimes to learn a new thing. Sometimes you'll be in a situation where you'll have basically comparable third-party and platform libraries, but you need to learn a new one, and that's an investment. So really what I'm getting at is if you want to know if you should use libraries or not, think of it from a risk/reward scenario, because it really always is. You're gonna get benefits and disadvantages. Like, for example, with coroutines, if I can replace all my RX Java code with coroutines, I can pull out an entire pretty, heavy library out of my application. So that's going to mean I could potentially have more, method counts, dex limit, blah, blah, blah for other libraries. So anyways, it's always it's a value situation you got to look at. Hopefully that kind of answers your question. I'm feeling rambly today. Quick question. A lot of questions today. So we've got Shabam. All right, so Shabam asks, what do you think about the architecture patterns by Google, and would I like to use live data and view model? So I have used live data and view model, and I actually have a giant tutorial on those. So if you're curious about, if you literally want me to build an entire friggin' application in front of you, go check out, what's it called? Let's build a room. What was it? Let's build a room database application. I don't know. Check out my channel. I have a room database tutorial which uses live data, view model, room, a bunch of Android architecture components, model view, view model. And if you're curious about my thoughts on that, you should go watch that tutorial. And then, so another, let's just fire off. I'm going to try and fire off a couple of quick ones here. All right, so if he asks, which is better for Android apps, Kotlin or Java? Again, there's not an easy answer. What I would suggest to you at this point is you're not going to lose a lot by starting with Java and gaining the fundamentals of working with Java. And if you're a junior Android developer, it might be worth, at the very least, spending just even a couple of weeks learning Java, depending on how fast you learn. As far as if you should switch to Kotlin, we are already getting to the point where there's enough open source resources that you could probably feasibly just jump right into Kotlin. It's going to be difficult because you're going to be... here's the thing. Here's how I would answer this. If you can, probably Kotlin is better due to the features of the language. That's fairly, in my opinion, this is not really debatable. People want to know, is Java better or Kotlin better? Listen, Kotlin's a new language. It's made by really good developers, and they're looking to solve a lot of the issues that people hate with Java. So you're going to get features that really help. Like, as a quick example, I don't think I would have actually bothered to write this class, this thing I showed earlier, this calculator implementation class. I don't think I would have bothered to write all this shit in Java, because this would have sucked. Like, the fact that I could basically split this expression using these delimiters, create a new list, and then map, using Kotlin strictly, map from this list to this new list, which was output, and then like map from one data type to another. Like if you were to write this crap in Java, it would really suck, let alone this stuff here. There's so many things that are great about Kotlin, like this when control statement. When is super amazing. You can use this for all kinds of purposes. Totally awesome. Anyways, I'm tangenting, but so the question is, yeah, if you can, probably Kotlin is better. There's no major problem becoming familiar with Java, though. You'll be able to learn from a massive amount of open source Java projects, which you'll want to be able to do. So which is better? I can't even really answer that for you. What I would answer is probably Kotlin is better for many reasons, but simply by way of the fact that there is a larger open source code base and a lot more examples and tutorials and teachers in Java. In some ways, it's going to be easier to learn Java. That's basically my answer there. All right, I'm just going to run a quick commercial break. If you've liked the show so far, please do me a favor and hit the like button down below, and consider pausing your ad blocker. All right. I will do best Polish impression. We have Krzysztof from, I believe, Poland joining us. Cześć, jak się masz? Kurwa. Anyways, that's my... Sorry, we had a viewer from Poland talking Polish at me and just replying with my best Polish impression. Potato is life. I'm part Polish, so I can make fun of Polish people, so fuck all you. Sorry, that was... I don't mean to swear, but I do. Okay, we've got so many questions right now. This is totally awesome, but let's see here. You are welcome, Vualex? Vualex? Thank you. Yeah. So I just have to, we have to take a moment for some off-topic discussion, because I'm super interested in languages. This won't take long. I'm super interested in languages and different cultures, because I grew up in Canada and we're super multicultural here. Like we have everything. Where I live, there's like tons of Asians, tons of Indians, as in East Indians, tons of you know, European, Anglo kind of people, lots of Slavs. It's really a melting pot here in Canada. And so I grew up around so many different cultures and languages. And just one little tidbit for all the people watching. One thing I've learned over the years is that if you're from maybe Poland, Slovakia, Czech, Serbia, just a whole bunch of like those kind of Eastern European states, they kind of all have pretty much the same, one of the same swear words, which is kurva. So for all my friends from other countries, if you meet someone from like Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, all those different places, it is a swear word, but just try saying kurva. Anyways, let's get back to reality here. Okay. So one more quick question, and then we're going to get to MVP orientation changes. And what is your name? Gatam? Did I spell that right? Gatam. Oh, we've got Croatia as well. Speaking of, again, slightly off topic, but my Croatian friend, did you watch Stipe Miocic fight last night? That was a pretty amazing result. Just some random MMA talk here, but Stipe Miocic is a Croatian MMA fighter, and he fought Francis Ngannou, who's French, although he's originally African. Heavyweight MMA fight. Anyways, random babbling. Gautam asks, can I tell him about chaining API calls in RxJava? So I'll talk about this really quickly. I can't give you a big sermon, but let me just show you some code and maybe that'll help you out. You can always check the repository later. I haven't updated this repository yet, but where's a good example I can show you? Let's look at Android REST tutorial. So Gautam, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Gautam, if you want, go ahead and check out this repository down below, Android REST tutorial. And you're going to see my RxJava implementation in there. And so the question was sort of chaining, what was it? Can I talk about sort of chaining API calls in RxJava? So essentially what you want to do in RxJava is you want to represent those API calls as observables. So that's kind of the main thing we're talking about. So at a very high level, let me see if, do I have that code? Let me just pull up this thing, Android, what do I call it? Event architecture? GitHub. As I'm pulling this thing up, I'm rambling in the chat, but yeah, there's been a lot of amazing Croatian MMA fighters like Branko Sekitic, Mirko Filipovic is one of my favorites, all-time favorites. Croatians must be tough bastards. Anyways, I meant that in a nice way for anyone who's easily offended. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to pull up a code here. What did I call this thing? Event architecture? Jesus Christ. I can't remember what I call things. Rx event architecture. Okay, I don't know why it didn't auto-complete. Sorry, I'm just pulling up a GitHub repository so I can answer your question better. And it's taking a little bit. Use case, presenter. Okay, here we go. So I might also have this repository listed, but you can find it in my main GitHub account, Bracket Cove. So the question was like chaining Rx operators. So basically what you want to do is you want to be what was the question? It was a little more specific than that. Can I talk about chaining API calls? So how I approach this is, so we've got our presenter, or however you lay things out. Essentially what this presenter is going to be is it's going to be what you would call the subscription, I believe. It's the thing, it's the end, that's not necessarily what a subscription is, I guess, but it's kind of like, it's the end point of the stream. It's where the things jump out of the stream. So what I'm doing is I'm representing essentially this use case, or this could be like a call to a repository. It could be that as well. This is the API call that you're kind of talking about. Sorry, I'll zoom in a little bit. How do we kind of do this in RxJava and chain this? So in the presenter, in one class, we execute we call this API call. And then what we do, so that returns an observable or a flowable. This is the thing that we're calling. So here we have two separate API calls, which is kind of your question. And what I want to do is I want to say, okay, let's represent each of these API calls as an observable or a flowable. So we create them and represent them that way. And then, for example, if you wanted to compose these two things together, you could use observable.zip, which basically composes two API calls together. So it's going to basically take a result from both of these operations or API calls and pass them down here. Then they come here. And then this is like what I want to return when this code executes. So this is just an example of like, okay, we've got an RX we've got some RX code here, and then we've got some RX code here, and then I've even got some RX code, of course, in these data result objects. So these are the actual APIs that we're calling. They're not real. The purpose of this project is just to demonstrate what this kind of looks like. If I go to the model, which are the APIs, we can go to service A and B. And so these things are going to return just an observable in this case. So what I want you to think of is one of the best ways to sort of handle multiple API calls and to do RxJava properly to the point where you don't have like these enormous chains is you want to like spread it out. And unfortunately, man, for me to sit here and try and verbally explain how to do that would be impossible. You got to look at code and you got to kind of go line by line through the code and be like, okay, this does this, this does this. And hopefully that almost kind of answers your questions. Anyways, I'm running out of breath, so I'm going to take one more commercial break here, and then we're going to talk about MVP and orientation changes and stuff like that. Yeah, Renata, if you're asking, I watch a ton of UFC. Just some random off-topic banter. I'm definitely a person of varied interests. Like, even in high school, I was spending half the time in the computer room and half the time in the weight room in the gym. Like, I've always been a fan of strength sports and fighting and all kinds of stuff like that. And I am a huge MMA fan. But I would say my favorite sport to watch is boxing. I love heavyweight boxing and middleweight boxing and everything in between. Huge boxing fan. But also, you know, I have like a friggin' encyclopedic memory of like old school MMA fights like Pride and what are the other ones? Early UFC, K1, all that stuff. Like I love watching that. There was a huge UFC fight last night, which was anyway. Sorry, I'm rambling about UFC when I should be talking about programming. But yeah, huge MMA fan. If you ever want to like get me rambling, just get me talking about old school MMA or boxing fights, and that's like one of my favorite things. All right. Okay, let's get into, yeah, there's some off-topic discussion. Again, this is totally off-topic, but Vualex comments that political correctness is getting really insane in Canada, and I have to basically absolutely agree with you there, although I have to be really careful what I say, because I don't know whether what I say will be used against me on those particular topics. But I do agree that political correctness is something which has lost sight of its original goal, which was to actually, like, I don't know. Anyways, I'm not going to get into political correctness talk right now, but I absolutely agree with you. Anyways, let's get to back to programming. You're mentioning Jordan Peterson. Yeah, Jordan Peterson, he's a polarizing figure. You know what, maybe I'll ramble about that at the end. Let's get back to programming, because I'm sorry, people. I know you're here to listen to programming, but I just like rambling. So let's get started. MVP and orientation changes. So So I was having some discussions on the Slack channel with one of my regular viewers and one of my programmers, Devor, and he was discussing, we were talking about orientation changes in Model View Presenter, and this is something which has been a recurring theme in my projects. Now, one of the ways that I handled this in the past, I'll just kind of walk through it maybe in Pause Trainer, which I think I have open. So let's go ahead and look in the Android Studio view here. So excuse me. So one of the ways that I used to handle orientation changes is, so let's open up a fragment. So the first thing I would do is I would inject the presenter into the fragment. And then I would call set retain instance true in the fragment. Now, I've talked about this thousands of times, so I'll just give you the abridged version. But when you call set retain instance to true, when you tilt the phone, the fragment's instant does not get destroyed, hypothetically, but the fragment's view gets destroyed. So essentially, what that means in code is that when you call set retain instance, if I tilt the phone and the activity recreates, the fragment itself, it's going to skip onCreate. It's going to skip this, but it is going to go through onCreate view. It is going to run this stuff again, and it's going to rebuild its view, because naturally the activities layout has changed, so it needs to recalculate everything. And then, so basically what I do is I'd make sure I injected into my presenter, and I made sure my activity was basically decoupled. So essentially what I would do is I would get the instance from the activity, from the, oh, that was a good voice crack. My mom says I can date girls soon. What I would do is I call to the fragment manager and I get the fragment manager decides whether it needs to create a new fragment or not. If the fragment manager returns null, then we do need to create a new one, and then we execute onCreate, but otherwise we just add it back to the fragment. And so what that does is we're basically decoupling this fragment's instance from the activity's life cycle. And we're doing that through dependency injection and set retain instance. So I've tested this before, and the way that you can test this, and this might be useful information for, you might have already tried this, Devor, but what I would do as a quick way to see if instances are working properly or not is, so I would open the, I would debug the application, and what I would do is I would just check the state of my presenter and the things within the presenter. I would check and see if those are the same instance before and after the orientation change. So that's how I kind of verify that we are actually preserving things on orientation changes. So I tested this out in my approach in Pause Trainer a while ago, and it did appear to be working properly. We did appear to be having a situation where orientation changes were decoupled from the phone and everything was working well. The problem is I'm not really settled quite yet that that's necessarily the best way to do this. And so what I've been thinking of, I thought about this a lot, and I'm really just going to be sharing a new approach and perspective. And also, Devor, what I would suggest to you people watching, go ahead and check out the Slack channel. I have a Slack channel. We have a Slack channel, the Wise Ass Community, me and my programmers, and programmers is a gender neutral term. Ladies are welcome too. We, get busy and debate these kinds of things and talk about them. So if you're curious or want to be a part of these discussions or chat with me or whatever, join the Slack channel, link down below. But Devor and I were kind of talking about orientation changes. One sec. So I should have taken a photo of this, but I got busy and I don't know if I should be honest about that, but I got busy and got a little inebriated, and when I get inebriated I like to draw. I won't tell you how I was inebriated, but it wasn't alcohol and it wasn't hard drugs. But I ended up drawing a diagram of how I would like to handle the state of my applications. And I haven't quite fully implemented this in code, but essentially, so we've got our view, which observes a view controller, and the view controllers depend on view models, and then the view controllers also depend on presenters. And then we also, if we need, we can have an adapter which the view is observed, and I'm not certain if that's actually going to be an observer relationship, but this is my own unique way of drawing software architecture. So the I symbols mean observer pattern. It means that we're not like depending on the view model, we're observing data from it, and there is a key difference there. So basically what my approach to this, what I'm trying to do, is I want to set up where I do have a persistent view model. Not the view model, here's where things suck. Let me show you where where I was going with this. Do I have it in Kotlin calculator? I think I do. So if I'm able to implement this drawing properly, then what it would basically look like is, so I haven't implemented this properly yet, but what I want to do is I want to inject a view controller object, which is unfortunate. I'm not sure if I'm actually doing this in this project. I might not need to in this one, maybe in Catalyst. Anyways, whatever, I can talk about the code when it's actually finished, but why do I want to do this? So essentially I want a situation where the view which is tied to the activity's lifecycle, it really is just a view, and when the phone's screen tilts, this stuff can go away, the top layer, but everything down here, because the thing that holds it, the thing that contains all this stuff, is going to be a lifecycle, Android lifecycle class or a view model class. Because of that, my hope is that that will like totally decouple my entire backend from the Android activity lifecycle. So that's the approach I'm going to take. Now people are probably wondering, like, Ryan, why do you have view controller and view model and presenter? Like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you trying to confuse this? Because you spend all this time complaining about view models and all that stuff. And my reply to that is, listen, just let me work, see if I can figure this out. And if I can figure it out and explain the principles behind it and it works, then you'll probably thank me for it later. I'm not trying to confuse people even more because I realize I change these things all the time, but I'm really excited about implementing this approach, and I'm close to doing it in Catalyst. So anyways, let's just kind of go do some back and forth discussion about Model View Presenter now. You know, if people have thoughts on it and their approaches, I'm happy to kind of do a bit of back and forth, and then after that we'll call it a day. But that's kind of my thoughts and my current approach. And at the end of the day, the most important thing you want to do is you just want a situation where your application's state is decoupled from the Android lifecycle, honestly. Because don't put things which should be persistent in a thing which dies all the time, which gets repeatedly destroyed and recreated. Like, that's really the fundamental here. Anyways, let's hop back to the chat. You see, Davor says it looks a lot like Model View model architecture. Here's the problem, man. I don't even think that Model View Presenter or Model View Model are complete architectures anymore. I don't even really think of them like that now. I'm moving more and more to this kind of architecture, and it's no longer even really sensical for me to just call it model view presenter, and it's certainly not sensical for me to call it model view view model. So it's a difficult situation because I'm almost, the better I get at this architecture stuff, the more I move away from like specifically MVVM or specifically MVP, because what I'm seeing is that you really can separate it more. You can pull it out into more than that. And if I can share something really quickly, this is Clean Architecture by, oh, I totally covered the name, Robert Martin. I just want to demonstrate, like, this is the kind of thing that I'm going for. And I should mention, I'm not just copying Robert Martin. Like, I'm doing my own approach to this stuff. I'm trying to learn it organically. Anyways, let's see. Where is Clean Architecture? But this is sort of more or less what I'm getting at based on Robert talking about Clean Architecture. Now, I'm not going to do it exactly like that, but what we basically see here, the most important thing is, like, let's get away from MVP and MVVM for a minute and just say, okay, we've got a presentation layer, we've got a domain layer, and we've got a data layer. And that's how I'm kind of trying to approach building applications now. And in a sense, that almost is like view presenter model. It almost is in a higher level, but the problem with just MVP or just MVVM is, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, you need more than those three things to build your front end. You need more than just a model and a view. Sorry, a presenter and a view to build your front end. You might need a controller. And then people are like, well, what's a controller? Isn't a controller this pattern? Are we talking MVC now? And it's like, I'm not even talking about MVP, MVC, MVVM. I'm talking about, what does my architecture need? Do I want a view model? Which, I don't mind the word view model as long as it's just a view model. It's not actually a view model and a view controller, which is how most people do it. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, you can tell I'm getting agitated and rambling. But interesting stuff. Let's get back to chat. Sorry, I totally like rambled about that. Oh yeah, I did have a look at your repository, Devor. Do you want, what do you think, would it be okay if I pulled up your repository right now and kind of talked about it? I'll just ask your permission first, but that might be kind of an interesting thing. But I did have a look this morning at your approach. That might be kind of a neat thing. Awesome. Let me just go ahead and find that history. Sorry, this could take a moment. So I just want to mention to everyone watching, like, if you have like a repository, if it's your repository and you want me to look at it, that's totally something I'd be happy to do. In fact, I'd love to kind of start doing that, because it's nice when I have like new things to talk about and I can kind of look at code and then talk about it, because a lot of times I'm just trying to give you my understanding, and I get tired. I get tired of explaining stuff, and sometimes it's easier for me to just like point at things and be like, yes, this is good. Yes, this is bad. Now, I'm not going to like dissect Devor's code a huge amount, but I'm happy to look at it. Let me just pull it into view here. And, you know, just for everyone watching, like, if you have, if you want me to look at another project, the only thing I ask is that, like, if it's not your code, try and make sure that it's open source license, because I don't want to go through someone's friggin' proprietary code. Anyways, all right. So this is one of my wise-ass programmers' approach to model view presenter orientation changes, which is basically the main subject we're talking about. So Devore's got a base package I see here. So this is going to be like the things that you would generally want to have in every activity, every fragment, every presenter, every view. And yep, so that's pretty standard stuff. Good code to an interface practice. So data is presumably going to be the backend, and he's got data models, local for a fake data source, local repository. Posts, that's going to be our data model object. Anyways, back to the MVP stuff. So it looks like what I had a look this morning at what Devore was doing. So he's followed a similar approach to what I was doing. So we're basically getting the fragment based on the fragment manager. So if it's null, then we create a new one. Add it to the activity just like so. And hey, you're welcome, man. To be honest, like I basically stole this from Android architecture blueprints, so I should really pass the... it's not really complicated code, but I did originally see it in architecture blueprints samples. So that's, yep, that's all good there. So what do we got here? So a couple of things. So Devore, he's creating the model and the presenter in the fragment. Now, if we want to be real Nazis, for lack of a better term, about separation of concerns, you may want to apply some dependency injection here, but really not the end of the world. You're doing a good job with separation of concerns, so I'm not being super critical. But so he creates the model and the presenter, passes the model and the view into the presenter. And then, of course, he's got this adapter. This was a big thing that I haven't figured out how to properly handle 100%, which is part of... I'm going to try and approach it based on... Sorry. Why is my cursor disappearing? There we go. I'm going to try and handle it based on the state of the adapter being within a view model controller thingy. Hate that word. What Devore has done here is he's got a adapter which is separate from the view, which again not necessarily a big issue. And then so what the main thing the main thing that Devore is doing is, so he's got his fragment watching the activity's life cycle, and then he's binding and unbinding his adapter and presenter based on lifecycle events. So the most fundamental thing we have here with handling lifecycle events is, again, we need some way of decoupling from the activity, and this is a totally valid way of doing it, is to just use the built-in fragment lifecycle methods. Let's have a quick look. And then in the presenter, of course, we've got the view and the model, and that gets passed in. So this is application of dependency injection here, which is simply giving an object its dependencies. And yeah, so that looks like a totally valid implementation to me. There's a couple things, like the one thing I would say is that, like, maybe if you wanted to go like a little bit of a step further, you could maybe see if you could set up some way to inject stuff into the fragment, but it's really not a huge issue. Now, one thing I'm wondering is you're not calling set retain instance. So I'm wondering if you're deliberately kind of recalling, I'm wondering if your instance is getting destroyed potentially without calling it, just simply because you don't have fragment.setRetain_instance set to true. But I don't actually know this, because I've heard before that setRetain_instance might not necessarily behave the way it totally should. But if you're able to like check on that, like maybe check and see, again, you could attach a debugger and then just figure out whatever the ID of the current fragment instance is. And then you could just, like, with it set up in the debugger, just tilt it and see if the number, the instance ID, the reference number of that fragment changes, that means it's creating a new instance as far as I'm aware. Super interesting though. Any comments on that, Devor, or anyone else? Oh, that would be a great one. Yeah, I could do that another time. Vulex is asking if I could do if I could go through Google's GitHub browser sample, which is a sample I've looked at a lot before and I reference a fair amount. Yeah, I could definitely do that. I don't have time now because I'm already like a half hour over what I normally do, but yep, I can definitely look into doing that. Oh, it's in base fragment. Oh, I see. Devor mentioned that, which totally makes sense. He's called set retain instance in base fragment. So he has actually called that. And that totally makes sense because if it's a bit of code that, if it's the same code is always going to exist in all of these fragment classes, it makes sense to pull it out into like an abstract class or a parent class. So he's totally called that. The mView variable. So Devor would like to hear my opinion about the view. Let's see here. So presumably, now the view based in the presenter, I'm assuming. If you could just clarify that. Yeah, so most likely this thing. So what do I think about having the view in there? I don't really see in the fragment. Okay, the view mView variable in the fragment. View mView. Let me just look at the code for a moment here. Hopefully I'm not in full cam whore mode here. Let's start. So I'm wondering, so I'm just trying to figure this out. Yeah, I'm not sure if I could really, so Devor is talking about this mView thing, and I guess he has subviews involved here, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. I'm just trying to, again, this is like the second time I've ever looked at this. And you mentioned subviews. I'm not, well, as it stands now, I don't really understand why you have the view here as a member variable, but it sounds like you've got some intentions with that. I don't really understand, to be honest, why you do have the view as a member variable, but it sounds, like I say, it sounds like you've got a purpose with that. The purpose isn't evident to me just looking at this code here, but oh, edit text and view. Oh, and you're storing the state of your subviews. Interesting. You know, we'll have to have a look at this another time. On click, update recycler view, display new posts. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I don't really, like I say, I don't immediately understand why you've got the view as a member variable, but yeah. Anyways, one more, I think I'll do one more question, and we can, you know, keep doing some back and forth and rambling. That's totally fine, but I'll just answer a quick question here. Um, So this question's by Rawati, and this is actually totally, these are the kinds of questions I like to answer. So I'm happy to, I like these general questions from people because these are the questions that I really wanted to know as a beginner. So Rawati asks, how do you get from beginner to advanced? So I'm gonna think of how I can answer this question. What I'll do is I'll explain my experience and belief sets which supported me in becoming a much better developer. And I think that's really all I can give you that's particularly useful. So, so for starters, understand it's going to take years. Like I've been doing this for over 3 years now, Android specifically. Now, I haven't been like nose to the grindstone on Android for 3 years straight. A lot of that has just been studying in my spare time, but it's taken 3 years for me to get to this point. So the first thing, understand for starters, it will take months to see progress at times. You'll go through periods of months where you're having trouble. The main thing, so number one, I've talked about this before at quite extensively. Follow project-based learning. So what is project-based learning? So I'm a beginner developer and I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I want to learn how to build a great app, but I don't know what to do. There are too many APIs for me to learn. There's too many topics I don't know anything about. And so what do I do? This is like from my perspective in the beginning. So when you're a beginner, number one, don't focus on learning new APIs and concepts for the sake of just memorizing them. Pick a project and learn things based on that project. So instead of saying, okay, I want to learn RxJava because I want to learn RxJava, you're like, I want to learn RxJava to solve this specific issue in this specific application. So that's going to do a couple things. It's going to, you'll learn better because the information is directly relevant to a task you are learning, and that will increase cognition. You're going to remember it better. So for me, when someone asks me like, this is one of my big secrets, is I'll get questions sometimes about really technical topics. And sometimes I do a really shitty job answering them, but sometimes I give good answers. My understanding of APIs like Dagger 2, RxJava, my architecture understanding, I understand it because I've built it. I focused on building the thing and not so much about asking questions and focusing on definitions and names and jargon. Build the thing. That's how you get good. Build the thing. In simple language. So follow project-based learning. This is definitely like my biggest suggestion. I should do a video about these, honestly. So number one, follow project-based learning. Understand that you might try to build things the best you can at the time, understanding that you're not necessarily going to be able to do everything properly. Like, what I'm trying to say here is, if you're a beginner, maybe your goal might be to have your architecture look something like this. Maybe it won't. But, you know, we have to be pragmatic. Are you going to be building highly modular, decoupled architectures using multiple different APIs super quickly? Maybe if your name's Darrell Bitsy, but anyways, For most human beings, that's not possible. Us normal human beings. Dorel is a friend of mine who's was able to learn really, really quickly, and it really surprised the hell out of me, and I'm very proud of him. Je suis fier. Anyways, we're going to be doing an interview really soon, which I'm excited about. But so try to build. So this is a big thing. I always try to build things the best I can at the time, with a slight grasp on pragmatism. And pragmatism is really like, okay, I want to build this thing really well, but also at the same time, let's not necessarily try and do everything 100% properly. Understand them in the beginning that some things you're just not going to be able to do really well. You're maybe not going to be able to like decouple your architecture to this degree because you just don't have the understanding of Dagger 2 or something like that. I'm trying to think of other points I can make. So try to build things the best as you can at the time, but you know, don't get, what I would say is just don't get stuck. Like if you reach a point where you really can't solve a problem and it's stopping you from progressing the entire project, then you can be like, okay, let's do a quick solution for now and understand this is something I want to revisit later. What else can I talk about? Try to, this works for me, but prefer learning an hour or two a day over, you know, 10 hours each weekend. This is going to depend on your schedule, but initially, the thing about this is, this is actually a concept I've learned from exercising actually, but whether you're learning program or you're learning a new skill, learning to program, learning a new skill, lifting weights, doing yoga, doing meditation, any of that stuff, what seems to be a recurring trend in achieving mastery in all these different areas is the best workout for you, the best workout is the one you will do, to quote Mark Bell. The best diet is the one you can follow. The best API to learn is one that's, you know, relevant to your project and, you know, something you can kind of learn in isolation. Kind of messed that explanation up. The best, you know, if you need to start with 5 minutes a day for meditation, do that. If you need to start with studying 30 minutes a day and you can't handle studying more than that for whatever reason, just do 30 minutes a day. Prefer consistency over just like leaps and bounds and then spaces in between your learning. That's a really fundamental thing I try to apply in basically every area of my life. So just an important little tidbit. What's the last thing I can talk about here? This is the last thing I'll say to you. As soon as you can, try to learn your projects. Try to learn concepts from open source. Working open source code instead of tutorials/videos/articles. Now, I'm not saying don't look at tutorials, videos, and articles. I'm not saying don't come and ask my pasty white ass for help. What I'm saying is this is mostly where I like to learn from, and as I've progressed and gone from a beginner to advanced, the time I spend watching tutorials and reading articles, which takes a long time and doesn't work very well for my brain, has drastically shrunk. The time where I'm like, okay, new API I want to learn, let's see working open source code. I don't want to hear anyone talk about it. I want to see this new API or concept or architecture working in code. And then I learn from that code. I don't I try really hard to do that because that's just the quickest way to cut straight to the issue. That's, again, the thing I talked about before. Project-based learning, build the thing. That's how you learn. How do I learn to be a better cook? Cook a lot of food. How do I, I think you get the point. So anyways, I'm rambling like crazy, but anyways, I'll just ramble for a couple moments and then we'll call it a day. Best Java book for beginners by Khatib? Sorry, Kitab asks, what is the best, Sir, Sir, which is the best book of Java for beginners? You don't have to call me Sir, man. You can call me man, bro, Ryan, whatever you want. I'm not a very formal person, but thank you. What's the best book for Java for beginners? My book. No, I'm just if you're learning in Java, if you're learning Java and Android, you might want to pick up my book. Description in the box below. Again, I didn't learn Java mostly from a book so much as I spent a lot of time writing and making a ton of mistakes. And so that's to me the best resource for learning Java. But if you do, I'm trying to think. For beginners, I couldn't recommend a specific beginner Java book, but for advanced Java usage, there's this book called Effective Java by Joshua Block. And that's actually something I would like to pick up. Anyways, so yeah, I'll just stick around for about 2 more minutes. Any last questions, comments, concerns, blah, blah, blah? I'm very much risking something by talking about this, but earlier we were kind of rambling about political correctness and Jordan Peterson and a bunch of things. And, if you've been keeping tabs about what's going on, I live in North America and Canada specifically. And one of the things about Canada is that we're very strongly influenced both by what happens in the UK and what happens in America. I think UK because Canada still has fairly strong ties to England. And I think America primarily because they're our main trading partner. So we basically have to follow a lot of what America does. And so it's been an interesting thing for me to grow up in because, like, growing up, I always thought of myself like, okay, I'm basically like a liberal and a Democrat. And over the years, starting pretty much in 2014, this is total off-topic discussion, but starting in 2014, all of a sudden the political landscape like totally polarized. So you have, what's developed is on one hand, you have this thing called like the alt-right, which is like really conservative. And then you've got this thing called what I like to call the regressive left. And in either case, these are both people who like really want to control your life. Oh yeah, I'm totally getting in trouble with this stuff now. So you've got like ultra conservatives who want to tell people like me what to do. And you've got ultra, I'll say basically socialists. And with the understanding, I'm not saying I'm not telling you what my position is. I'm really a centrist in terms of political views, but it's just so interesting. The result of all this extreme polarization is like Trump got elected, and this guy named Jordan Peterson has become like world famous, and he's very, very popular in Canada. And Jordan Peterson is a very interesting character. He's quite intelligent. I don't agree with him on certain things, which sounds hilarious because people are like, Ryan, you're just some random friggin' other person from Canada. But the one thing I can't get behind is he had this enormous debate with 2 debates with Sam Harris, who's like, Sam Harris is like he's one of my favorite thinkers ever. And so I disagree with Jordan Peterson and his definition of truth. But other than that, he says some really incredible, useful, practical things and has influenced myself a fair amount. Anyways, I don't know why I'm rambling about Jordan Peterson and political polarization, but, you know, I like talking about interesting stuff. So anyways, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, we'll see you later. I'm friggin' tired. Peace out, everyone.